Warning, everything you're about to see in this video is 100% based off true events. With that being said, some of the material shown in this video might be graphic to some viewers. Viewer discretion is advised.
Caroline kept rolling, her hand steady, her nerves not.
On September 11th, 2001, it's safe to say that America stood still. 4 American airliners were hijacked by the terrorist group of Al-Qaeda. 2 of those 4 airplanes were flown into the World Trade Center in New York City, killing nearly 3,000 people. Until this day, America really didn't bat an eye as to the potential terrors that could happen on American soil. We felt protected under the United States and didn't think anything on this bad of a scale could ever happen here. 9/11 was really the first day where America felt scared. Until 9/11, we felt protected under the United States, and as previously stated, we didn't think anything this bad could happen here. When 9/11 happened, it was a breach of our safety. You're probably wondering, why am I talking about 9/11? What correlation does this have to the rest of the video? My answer to that is that I'm trying to show you guys that terrorism doesn't always happen from outside organized groups like Al-Qaeda. It could happen within our own United States under our own people. The story that is about to be talked about in this video is a great example of domestic terrorism. 2 United States citizens that go out of their way and share a common idea with Al-Qaeda to promote and invoke fear on the United States people. It's hard to believe that only a year and 21 days later, that America would once again be put into hiding at the hands of 2 people. This is the complete and organized timeline of the DC snipers.
Over a week now, 8 have been shot, 6 killed, 2 injured. A serial sniper is suspected, but is it terrorism? It is happening in and around the nation's capital.
The area, including local police, the FBI, U.S. Marshals, and Secret Service, is looking for whoever is responsible for the worst murder spree that has ever happened here.
Imagine yourself sitting down on a park bench, reading a nice little novel, when all of a sudden you hear a shot ring out in the distance. You look around, you wonder who shot, where that shot came from, and why they're shooting. And all of a sudden, you see your white t-shirt slowly filling up with a red stain. This was a gruesome and tragic reality for many people living in the Baltimore and Washington metropolitan area in October of 2002. During this scary time in American history, still mourning the deaths of all those lives lost in 9/11, 2 individuals put the Washington metropolitan area into hiding with their highly premeditated and discreet series of sniper killings. The duo killed from afar, usually within 80 and 90 yards of their target, leaving no trace for the police to follow. People all over the Washington and Baltimore metropolitan area were left scared to cut their grass, unload their groceries, and even pump their own gas, living every day with the constant fear that they could be one more tally to the already growing list of victims apprehended by what is now known as the Beltway sniper attacks of 2002. Like most killers, to understand the reason behind their series of horrific killings, you have to go all the way back to the start. You have to get to know who was behind the scope of the gun, as well as who was behind the wheel of the blue 1990 Chevy Caprice. Firstly, let's get to know the man that orchestrated the Beltway sniper attacks. He is the older man of the 2, 42-year-old John Allen Muhammad. John Allen Muhammad, born John Williams before later converting to Islam, was born on December 31st of 1960. His mother died of breast cancer when he was only 3 and was later abandoned by his father. He was primarily raised by his maternal grandparents. John would later marry a woman named Mildred in 1988 and end up having 3 children with her. Before meeting his wife, John, who was born and raised in Louisiana, enlisted in the Louisiana National Guard in August of 1978. Later, he transferred to the regular army on November 6th of 1985, where he served in the Gulf War, disabling and disassembling Iraqi chemical warfare rockets. He was later honorably discharged in 1994 after 16 years of service with a ranking of sergeant. Although John was back home and with his family, his wife Mildred said John's personality changed heavily. Mildred said that his personality grew darker and angrier. Upon leaving the military, John had a great amount of displeasure for his country. He grew unpredictable, joyful one minute and then flipping tables the next. John remained calm and composed around his friends for the most part, but his wife Mildred would say that calm and collected demeanor would soon fade away as soon as he entered his own household. As years of unpredictability came from John, his wife admitted to being scared of him at this point. Soon after their marriage in 1988, they would later divorce in 1999, and Mildred would file a restraining order against John. On March 27th of 2000, after agreeing on visitation rights to see his own children, John would essentially and illegally kidnap his own 3 kids and live out the next 18 months with them on the Caribbean island of Antigua. It is on this island where John would meet his murderous accomplice, Lee Malvo, a native of Jamaica. The reason these two individuals crossed paths was because John grew a relationship with Lee's mother. Malvo's mother was not very dependable. She never really gave Lee any attention, love, comfort, or reassurance. It would often leave him home alone for months on end as she traveled elsewhere for work opportunities. The often abandonment of his mother would lead Malvo down a path of loneliness, suicidal thoughts, and rage. While in the Caribbean, Lee was subject to all kinds of violence, robberies, shootings, and murders. On one occasion, Malvo stated that he once saw a cop bleed out from gunshot wounds on the streets of Jamaica. Seeing all these acts of violence happen so often and so young desensitized Lee to death, and would ultimately foreshadow his future in a pretty shocking light. While down in Antigua, John Muhammad made a living forging documents for people trying to get into America. As the friendship between Lee's mother and John grew, John would later forge documents to get Lee's mother into America. She and John arrived, and soon after, Lee would follow alongside, arriving in Miami in 2001. Lee's mother was unable to cover the costs of her new life that John has gifted her in America, so she offered John her son Lee as collateral until she was able to pay him back. It didn't take long when John arrived in America for his children to be forcibly removed from him by authorities. This happened on September 4th of 2001. John attended a custody hearing with the impression that he could try and persuade the judge into getting his children given back to him, but in reality, nobody in the courtroom cared for what John had to say. The decision was decided before he even walked in. After the hearing, John was given no visitation rights by the judge, and the sole custody of all 3 of his kids belonged exclusively to his ex-wife, Mildred. This actually broke John. Although John was not a good husband by any means, many would say that John was a good father. He was never seen yelling at his kids and talked to his kids as if they were one of his friends. In other words, if you want to get more serious about this, people would say that John's 3 kids were his only source of happiness, and in his eyes, his only purpose to be alive. When that was stripped from him by the courtroom on September 4th of 2001, something snapped in John, something that would change the course of several lives for eternity. Shortly after the custody hearing, Mildred, alongside her 3 kids, would move out of their home state of Washington and relocate all the way across the country in the Washington, D.C. area. Getting back to the unique relationship between John Muhammad and Lee Malvo, John saw Lee as someone who obviously lacked a father figure. With his kids now stripped away from him, he took it amongst himself to kind of father Lee and give him the care that Lee lacked his entire life. Little did Malvo know, all the care that he was receiving from John was all a part of an underlying sinister plan to eventually wreak havoc on the United States of America, and most importantly, his ex-wife Mildred. As you could probably predict, Lee loved John. In multiple interviews, he said that he would even die for him. John enrolled Lee at the Bellingham High School, located in Washington State. John also took him to the shooting range and taught him the cruel reality and issues of the USA judicial system, and built up Lee to hate America and everything it stands for. After months of living together, Lee and John had an inseparable bond. They lived together in the Tacoma, Washington area. They often hopped from living out of homeless shelters to crashing on the couches of John's friends. John told everyone that Malvo was his son, and Malvo did likewise and said John was his father. John even falsely listed himself as his actual father on all of Malvo's school documents. For unknown reasons that I couldn't seem to find online, Malvo was incarcerated by Border Patrol in the Washington state area. Malvo was fingerprinted and documented in all the police records, and then eventually released in January of 2002 on a bond of $1,500. I want you guys listening to take heavy note of this, because this was one of the mistakes that proved costly for the duo's wreak of havoc. At this point in the story, you probably have a lot of whys. Why does John Muhammad hate the United States so much? After all, he did serve them in the military. Well, a great majority of this just stems from the fact that the United States, in his eyes, took away his kids, and the sole custody belonging to his ex-wife Mildred was only more salt in the already open wound. Arising from this deep hatred he had for the United States, John devised a plan, and that plan would consist of one modified 1990 blue Chevy Caprice, one Bushmaster XM15 long-range assault rifle, and 3 weeks of sporadic terror that would shake the DC area to its core. On February 16, 2002, 2 days before Lee's 17th birthday, John issued Lee his first task that would let him know if he could trust Lee to carry out with his malicious plot to shake America. John gained intel on the location of his ex-wife's best friend, Isla Nichols. Isla Nichols was the friend that recommended to Mildred to take the kids and move as far away from John as possible. John ordered his accomplice Lee to walk up to the door, knock on it, and shoot whoever answered in the face. Lee did just that. Lee knocked on the door, and the woman that answered was not the intended target of Isla Nichols. Instead of Isla Nichols answering the door, it was her 21-year-old niece, Kenya Cook, who was babysitting at the time. Lee shot Kenya point blank in the face with a single bullet and proceeded to run away. Nichols' 14-year-old daughter later discovered Cook's deceased body laying in the doorway with a pool of blood oozing out of her face. This was the first confirmed kill of the duo of John Muhammad and Lee Malvo. From February to October of 2002, John and Lee would pinball across the United States, committing several murders and robberies. I don't want you to get confused. Lee Malvo's and John Muhammad's bloodbath doesn't really begin until October. So from the months of February 2002 to September of 2002, they just went around shooting and killing people, but really, this was just their warm-up. Here is the list of what is known as the preliminary shootings before the Beltway sniper attacks. On March 19, 2002, Lee Malvo killed a 60-year-old man while golfing in Arizona. On August 1st of that same year, Lee Malvo shot a 51-year-old man in the back of the neck while changing a slashed tire in Hammond, Louisiana. On September 5th, the duo shot up a 55-year-old pizzeria owner 6 times in Clifton, Maryland, but he survived. They then traveled to Atlanta on September 21st, where they robbed and fatally shot a man in the back of the head with a .22 caliber pistol. 19 hours later, the two would enter a liquor store in Montgomery, Alabama, and fatally shoot a 52-year-old cashier and critically wound a 24-year-old employee. The last of their preliminary killings and robberies consisted in the death of a 45-year-old man with a long-range rifle in Baton Rouge, Louisiana on September 23rd. It was around this time when John Muhammad saw their opportunity for an upgrade so incredibly uncustomary yet effective in their series of serial killings. On September 8th of 2002, John Muhammad and Lee Malvo pulled into the car lot of a Trenton, New Jersey car dealership, looking to purchase a vehicle that would appropriately suit their discreet killing needs. They finally settled on a used 1990 Chevy Caprice and drove it off the lot. As soon as John purchased the car, he got to a discreet location and began modifying it. He got an electric saw and cut out a small portion of the back trunk, no more than 2 inches or so, big enough so his accomplice could aim and shoot out the back of the car without being seen by the public. How things worked was John would drive around in the blue Caprice, oftentimes parking it on a side street, a parking garage, or a parking lot, just somewhere not too odd to raise an eyebrow. John's purpose, outside of driving the car, was he was also the spotter. He was the one looking out for Malvo and making sure there were no red flags that he saw that can make his kill an inconvenient one. If the coast was clear, John would give Malvo the green light to shoot. When Malvo got in position to shoot, he would lay flat with his stomach across the bed of the trunk. The back seats would be laid flat so his legs can stretch across the abdomen of the car. When Malvo honed in on a potential target, he would motion at John, to which John would pop the bed of the trunk. Malvo would pull down on the trunk so his scope could peer outwards. Malvo would slowly lift the barrel of his XM-15 Bushmaster assault rifle a couple centimeters from the hole in the trunk and pull the trigger. John would drive off with Lee in the bed of the trunk until they got to a spot that was deemed less hot. It's unknown exactly when the duo first started using the Caprice to carry out these attacks, but it's safe to assume that after September 8th, they got to work killing out the back of the car. If you were to question Malvo about what he was doing and the overall morality of it, he would say that he knew what he was doing was not right. Malvo would say that he did these horrible attacks to maintain the affection that John gave him, since he never had any growing up. Malvo would kill with a smile on his face because it made John happy, and he overall enjoyed the thrill of it. Malvo would boast to reporters that the post-shooting sex with John was one of the best parts of his day. And yeah, I said that correctly. Most of John's and Malvo's days consisted of playing violent video games, driving around and scoping out potential spots to kill people, eventually finally killing the people, have sex, then sleep in the car in empty parking lots until the next day began. What a life. 9 days after their last kill, on October 2nd, is the marked day of the very beginning of the mass murdering killing spree that the duo will eternally be remembered for. This is the beginning of the 3 weeks of terror. The first soul was claimed at 6:30 p.m. when the body of a 55-year-old program analyst named James Martin dropped to the asphalt in the parking lot of a Shoppers Food warehouse in Glenmont, Maryland. He was killed, and nobody knew where he died from or had any mere clue as to who shot him. And believe me when I tell you, this is just the beginning. On October 3rd, 5 more deaths would be added to that tally, as the District of Columbia of Washington, D.C. was now aware of what was going on. Around 7 a.m. on October 3rd, a landscaper that was nicknamed Sonny Buchanan, was shot while cutting a strip of grass. He was shot between his left shoulder blade and his spine. He was actually able to run a couple meters to a car dealership where he fell in front of 2 car dealership employees. Sonny was unfortunately being watched by Malvo and John for several minutes prior to his death. Once John gave Malvo the sign to take the shot, Sonny's life ended right there. It only took around 30 minutes for the next victim to be claimed. 54-year-old part-time taxi driver Prem Kumar was pumping gas at a mobile gas station on Connecticut Avenue. Kumar was slain by Malvo, who was stoked out in the back of the Caprice, located in a parking lot across the street from the mobile gas station. About 90 yards away, Malvo had to shoot across 6 lanes of moving traffic in order to kill Kumar. It might be too late to say this, but Malvo was a damn good shot. Another 30 minutes go by, and yet another life is claimed. This time, Sarah Ramos, a 34-year-old babysitter, was sniped and killed while sitting on a bench reading a book. Ramos was actually sitting on a bench in front of a store. The bullet went right through her and got lodged in the wall in the establishment she was sitting in front of. The duo wasted little time, killing Lori Ann Rivera just before 10 a.m. She was sniped and killed while vacuuming out of her car at a gas station in Kessington, Maryland. John and Lee would let daylight bleed to darkness before claiming the last life of that day. At 9:20 p.m., Malvo would scope out a 72-year-old retired carpenter, Pascal Charlotte, who was walking on a sidewalk. Charlotte would die in the hospital an hour later after a gunshot wound from Malvo. All of these kills were done in a similar manner. Not just the kills on this day, but in future days that I'm going to announce. The victims were all stalked by John and Malvo for several minutes prior to their death, and each of the sniper shots came within 80 and 90 yards of their victim. After the job was done, John would drive off with Malvo in the trunk. John and Malvo went out about killing people in a smart manner. Although their kills were sporadic, they made sure the coast was clear and didn't act out of impulse. Impulse leads to getting caught, and these two wanted to do this as long as they possibly could. After the deadly day that was October 3rd, school was canceled for several counties. People stayed in their cars and sometimes laid down to pump their own gas. There were no people walking on the sidewalk and no sporting events going on. The DC metropolitan area was in hiding, and the police had no answers to address to them other than the simple fact that they could not protect their citizens, and most importantly, could not protect their children. On October 4th at 2:30 p.m., Malvo would shoot and severely wound 43-year-old homeworker Caroline Sewell. She was shot while loading items into her minivan at the Spotsylvania Mall in Virginia. She would survive and make a full recovery. Later that day, the coverage of this killing spree was reaching all across the nation, and communities were taking all kinds of measures to protect their community and its children. Then the duo of Malvo and John made a statement that intensified the matter 1,000-fold.
That's when I saw this kid. I was on his head. And I dropped down. Just towards his lower back where his kidneys are.
Prince George County Emergency Center. Can I help you? Oh my God. I think I'm going to be able to drive my nephew to the hospital, but what's the matter with him? He just got shot.
Whew. At 8:07 a.m. on October 7th, 2002, Malvo shot a 13-year-old middle school student on the school ground. The student, named Iran Brown, was shot in the abdomen. The child was rushed to the hospital and thankfully survived. And to this day, he's actually pursuing a career in the medical field.
Stepping over the line, shooting a kid. I guess it's getting to be really, really personal now.
Many were startled to see the police chief cry, but those close to the investigation understood. The police felt as though they were failing the community, as they were unable to stop this elusive and ruthless killer.
After the shooting of the child, police officers, as well as the whole entire county, began searching the area around the middle school. They went across the street into the forest where they found some matted down grass and a shell casing. On top of those two findings, they found a calling card located in a plastic bag. If you want to get more specific, it was a tarot card with the image of a knight with a skull for a face riding a white horse. Also written on the tarot card was the text, "Call me God," as well as the text, "Do not release to the press." Although all the shootings and deaths are equally as tragic, this one shooting of the 13-year-old Iran Brown went to show how much John and Malvo did not care who they intended to hurt. They had no limits, and they wanted to stick to their plan. They aimed to shoot white people, black people, pregnant people, kids, cops, and all different kinds of people. Obviously, this was exercised when they shot the 13-year-old boy. On October 9th, the carnage continued. Malvo laid in the trunk of the Caprice and shot 53-year-old civil engineer Dean Myers while he filled up his Mazda. Even though Dean survived his first gunshot wound while drafted into Vietnam, he fell victim to Malvo and John on that fateful day in Manassas, Virginia. On October 11th at 9:30 a.m., businessman Kenneth Bridges was shot and killed from afar while filling up his tank in Fredericksburg, Virginia. 3 days later at 9:15 p.m., Linda Franklin, an FBI intelligence analyst, was shot and killed in a Home Depot parking lot in Falls Church, Virginia. By now, gas stations all across the East Coast started putting up tarps around their stations just so that people could feel a bit safer when fueling up their tank. At 8 p.m. on October 19th, 37-year-old Jeffrey Hopper was shot outside a steakhouse in Ashland, Virginia. He would later survive, and authorities on the scene would discover a note staked to a tree located in a Ziploc bag. The note was a message to police, and for the first time in all their crimes, John and Malvo demanded money. John demanded $10 million from the police, or else he would threaten the lives of more children. Also, in that same letter, just under the line where John demands the $10 million, he goes on to kind of gloat about the previous murders and robberies that they've had all across America, including one of the murders coming in Montgomery, Alabama. Whoever wrote the letter, whether it was Malvo or John, stated that they wanted to get in contact with the authorities via landline. The police chief came out and addressed the situation to the public, saying,
To the person who left us a message at the Ponderosa last night, we do want to talk to you. Call us at the number you provided. Thank you.
At 6 a.m., Malvo and John drove to a petrol station. Malvo grabbed a couple quarters and stuffed them into the payphone and dialed the landline to the Ponderosa Steakhouse. Now, for the very first time, the police force and the DC snipers were now in direct communication with each other. When the two reached each other, Malvo just told the police force, listening on the other end, to be quiet and listen. He stated that he wanted the police force to release to the press that the DC snipers were caught, deemed, quote-unquote, caught like a duck in a noose. He ended up finishing up the call by saying the chilling words, "Your children are not safe." When the call hung up, FBI analysts and all kinds of people that were covering this case started looking back at things they might have missed. Do you guys remember that liquor store shooting in Montgomery, Alabama that I previously mentioned? It was a part of those preliminary robberies and shootings. Well, that shooting in particular would be the law enforcement's first big break in this entire case. When overlooking the letter that the police received after the Ponderosa shooting, they saw that mentioned in the letter was an unsolved murder and robbery located in Montgomery, Alabama. This was enough to just ever so slightly tip off the police in the right direction. The Montgomery, Alabama shooting and murder and robbery had a piece of critical information that was never fully developed for unknown reasons. When Malvo robbed the liquor store in Montgomery, Alabama, for some reason during the liquor store robbery, he must have picked up a magazine and dropped it. Now, although this magazine was picked up at the scene of the crime, none of the fingerprints that were found on the magazine matched anyone in the USA's national data system, once again leading the police to a dead end. After the Montgomery, Alabama shooting case went belly up and remained unsolved, they took that magazine with Malvo's fingerprints on it from the scene of the crime, put it in a bag, and stored it in an archive. That magazine was taken out of its archive once the unsolved murder mystery of the Montgomery, Alabama shooting was brought to light by none other than the killers themselves. It was taken out of the archive and flown to Washington, D.C. for further evaluation. When the results came back from the DNA search from the magazine, it was incredible, to say the very least. They found a match in a Lee Malvo, and the only reason why they were able to find that match, because if you guys remember, in the beginning of this entire story, Lee got incarcerated by the Bellingham, Washington Border Patrol, and it was in that exact moment where he was documented in America, fingerprinted, accounted for, basically. And they found him just because of that one slip-up. Alright, so the authorities have found Lee Malvo. Now, how do they find the person that Lee Malvo was with? Well, before their rampage began, when the duo wasn't crashing on their friends' couches, they were living out of homeless shelters. In Bellingham, before the shootings, they were living out of the Lighthouse Mission homeless shelter. This was how the police were able to find the link between the two individuals. As this ginormous breakthrough was coming about in the case, Lee Malvo and John Muhammad killed one last person. On the morning of October 22nd at 6 a.m., Conrad Johnson, age 35, was shot and killed in his community in Maryland. He was on his bus's front steps when he was shot from the dark tree line, to which he staggered back into the aisle of the bus and died. Conrad Johnson's death would not be in vain, though, as well as all the other victims in this case. Soon after the linkage between John Muhammad and Lee Malvo, warrants for their arrests were announced all across the media, the news, the radio, basically everything you could imagine, and the police had a brief description of their car as well. It was a blue Caprice, with the license plate NDA 217. So now you got the entire public looking out for this one car with this one specific plate. At 3:30 a.m. on October 24th, 2002, Muhammad and Malvo were arrested while they slept in their car in an empty parking lot off of I-70. They were reported and arrested soon after the news of their warrants and plate numbers hit the air. Finally, for the first time in 23 days, the DC community can recover from this horrific spree of deadly attacks. Upon searching their car, the police found bags of clothes, several bottles of water, radios, bags of vitamins, the gun that they used to kill everyone with, logs and maps where they wrote down which areas they committed crimes and where else they intended to go. It would later be found out that they committed most of their deadly attacks while parked extremely close to highways as well as major streets, just so that it was easier to get out of the hot zone as fast as possible. On top of that, Malvo and John would also return to the scenes of their work, aka their killings. They often inspected their work, most of the times with officers right beside them. When John and Malvo were caught, people wondered, what made them do this? Why did they do this? And although we will never know because the speculation was shut down in the court due to a great lack of evidence, the running theory is that John Muhammad somehow found out the location of his ex-wife Mildred, who since moved from the Washington state area to the Washington DC metropolitan area. The theory goes on to state that Mildred was actually going to be the last victim of the Beltway sniper killings. Many believe that since these sniper murders were so spread out and seemingly sporadic, that if John were to have Malvo take out his ex-wife, that it would just look like a mere coincidence because of what was already happening at the moment. Despite this theory kind of making sense, nobody will ever know the true motivation behind these killings, or why John Muhammad decided to convert his 17-year-old comrade, Lee Malvo, into an absolute killing machine. In the courtroom, John Muhammad did not talk often, and when he did, or when he started getting accused of all the murders, he diverted all of the blame that was aimed at him. He threw his accomplice under the bus by saying that since he was not the one behind the trigger of the gun, that simply he was innocent. Yeah. Okay. Hearing John Muhammad try to justify their killings in a courtroom full of the families of the victims was emotionally sickening for many. John Allen was sentenced to death on November 10th, 2009. He was given a last meal of chicken and cake and was executed via lethal injection at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. He did not have any last words. John Muhammad's accomplice, Lee Malvo, was sentenced to life without parole. In 2012, he did an interview with the Washington Post saying, quote-unquote, "I was a monster," and, quote-unquote, "I stole people's lives." He would also go on to say that John Muhammad sexually abused him, and to this day, Malvo is confined to the thick concrete walls of the Red Onion Supermax State Prison in Virginia. On March 10th of 2020, Lee Malvo held a marriage ceremony inside the state prison, and that's pretty much all we know from him at this moment. Ladies and gentlemen, that will conclude the video. I just want to say thank you so much. If you stuck around for the 33 plus minutes of me talking, I really do appreciate you guys very much. All the clips used in this video will be linked down in the description, as well as all the background songs that I've used for this video will be linked down in the description. If you have any complaints about crediting or anything of that nature, please DM me on Instagram, as that's the platform I'm most active on. Thank you so much, everyone. Quick reminder, there's a Discord. My buddy made one, so go join that if you want. If not, that's totally okay. And yeah, I hope you guys have an awesome night, and be safe. It's a scary world out there, as you can see by this video. And yeah, peace out, guys.